This is the Keiser Report. Oh man, I can hardly wait for this. It's gonna be awesome. Stacy.
Max, things are so fun and exciting in the online digital crypto world, but in the meat space world and the real world here in America, I want to look at what happened during these primaries over in California a few days ago. Senator Dianne Feinstein was once again nominated for the Democratic Party nomination for senator there. She's one of the most radically neocon right-wing nut jobs I've ever seen. And yet the so-called progressive people of California keep voting her and voting her. The very progressives that say, that they should be somehow some sort of idol and hero and model for the rest of the world, and that Trump is a horrible person. Well, one of the candidates that lost for the Democratic nomination for governor, his name was Michael Schellenberger. He only got 17,440 votes, but he wrote this piece right before the primaries. Number one in poverty, California isn't our most progressive state. It's our most racist one. Everyone thinks California is our most progressive state, and why not? It imposes the highest tax on the richest 1%. It is aggressively implementing Obamacare, and it is standing up to President Donald Trump on everything from immigration to the environment. And yet, the Golden State is also number one in poverty and inequality in America. And he goes through a whole bunch of data, but this is the point, is that it's all talk, no action.
Isn't that the case? These so-called liberals are actually harboring some vicious neocons and some, what you might call there, the what's that, the economic model that's terrible?
Neoliberalism.
Neoliberalism. I got confused there for a second because liberals in the same, and used twice there. It's not the utopian vision that some imagine of being. It's conservative/fascist.
Well, it's quite apocalyptic if you look at some of the data and facts that he lays out. Homeless encampments of hundreds of people have cropped up around the state in the last 2 years. Occasionally, they are ravaged by hepatitis A, which killed 20 people last year. In Silicon Valley, 132 people died on the streets in 2016, up from 85 in 2015. In San Diego, 117 people died, up from 56. Part of this is directly related to the cost of rent, which are directly related to the cost of so-called progressive policies, which is really about people who are very wealthy, say in Beverly Hills or Santa Monica or Silicon Valley, not wanting housing units built in their area. So they come up with all sorts of environmental restrictions and building restrictions to avoid anybody having access to basically lowering the price of their housing as well.
Right. I mean, we've been traveling all over the world for years, and you go to places like Egypt, and you see people who are genuinely poverty-stricken, who are living on a few dollars a day. Or you go to North Africa, and other areas of North Africa where you see similar types of extreme poverty. And now we're seeing that in America, a permanently entrenched underclass of poverty-stricken, really folks that will never, ever escape poverty and are just living on the street. And there's going to be no turning back.
Here's another point he points out. It's so gross and horrible, and it just sounds like one of these Night of the Living Dead sort of scenarios. But he said last year, San Diego city workers nearly killed a homeless person after accidentally throwing her and the tent she was sleeping in into the back of the garbage truck. She escaped just seconds before being crushed by the trash compactor. So this is really like this human garbage and human waste. We showed a video from a few months ago in the BART station in San Francisco. You're paying millions of dollars to live in a little hovel there in San Francisco. And this crack addicts, heroin addicts, all sorts of addicts in the stations, and human feces all over the roads. And it's, this is the progressive nirvana.
That's the interesting point. We know two things. We know that the U.S. economy is generating a permanent class of garbage people, zombie people that are on the streets and will never come back. We also know that the progressives and the liberals in a state like California don't see it. They don't, for some reason, they ignore it. They don't understand it. They don't see it. They don't understand the connection between their warmongering policies. You know, Dianne Feinstein would never voted against a war, and all that money goes into war that could go into, let's say, helping people not live on the streets. She doesn't see the connection. She's not a liberal. She's not progressive. She's a neocon. She's a war hawk. But in the state of California, they spin it as something completely different. And sadly, because this is contributing to a collapse of many aspects of the American experience.
I want to also talk about the racist policies and the actual outcomes of California. But in terms of this neocon sort of really nasty, violent state thuggishness of California, the genuine heart of the so-called California progressive liberals, Democrats, is that they were forced to reduce their population in their prison population by the courts. The court said they were grossly overcrowded. This was human rights violations. So they had to reduce the population of their prison by 12% between 2011 and 2015. But they have a very, very powerful union, okay? Unions are progressive, right? But these are prison guard union, and it's super powerful. So that's why in the state they pay more for prisons than they do for education. And while they reduce the population of prisoners by 12%, the prison guards were very upset with this. So in fact, they increased the budget for prisons by $500 million. So they wanted more, they had to give them more money in order to make them feel bad. But California today spends more per prisoner than any other state, $65,000 annually, which happens to be the same amount it costs to send a high school graduate to Stanford University for a year, one of the best universities in the world. That's the equivalent. That's how much it costs to lock up one person for stealing a slice of pizza.
Well, you know, I came up with the phrase a few years ago, casino gulag. And that's the American economy is becoming the casino gulag. You have a few people who get rich in the casino of Wall Street, or they become professional athletes or what have you, and there's a very small percentage of a 1% that hits the casino lottery billions. But everyone else is living in a gulag. This is the new gulag. This is the American gulag. And they see it in every major city across America. And it's the result of corruption. It's the result of a government in free fall. It's the result of a central bank that is not accountable to anyone and just prints trillions of dollars to go drop bombs and bail out bad banks. And there's no turning back. You know, our friend Dmitry Orlov wrote a famous essay, Collapse Gap, a few years ago, said that the Soviet Union and America would both collapse for the similar reasons, just that the U.S. would take longer. They said the Soviet Union was like falling out of a one-story window, and America's like falling out of a 20-story window. And I think we're seeing this now play out in real time. America's falling out of that 20-story window. It is a collapse gap. The Soviet Union and America collapsed roughly at the same time for roughly the same reasons, and now America's having its Boris Yeltsin moment with Donald Trump.
So then he talks about the racist outcomes of the education system, and part of it is caused by the prison system. Takes up so much of the state budget, so there's less available for Californian schools. And these schools, if you look at per capita spending on students, it's actually the fourth lowest in America. Also, they have, you know, the pro-immigration policies, but don't have the funds to adapt to all the languages spoken in the schools. So all the classes are held back because a lot of the students don't speak English, which is fine, I think, if they just teach them all to be bilingual instead, but they're all having to catch up on English. But he says that progressive leaders who daily denounce Republicans as racist have blithely presided over a significant decline in the academic performance of Black and Latino eighth graders relative to their counterparts in other states. Today, less than 40% of non-white and non-Asian students meet state educational standards. So the actual outcomes for Black and other non-white students in California are worse than most other states. So their actual results are worse.
That's correct. And I guess it has something to do with the presence of the entertainment industry, which is very good at telling falsehoods and spinning, turning tinsel into box office gold. And then you have San Francisco and the high-tech industry, which just builds incredible walls around reality, and they could live in cyberspace. They don't actually live in the real world. So as a result, you have like Calcutta-like conditions in LA and in San Francisco. The casino gulag is growing by leaps and bounds. And some of these other countries that have already been through this, like Soviet Union, they're actually moving in the other direction.